What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. We've been grinding the mid-season 10 balance update, and tanks are a lot different than they were before. And based on reading comments and seeing a lot of players play and try to fail to adapt to the changes, I think I've got a lot of advice that's going to help you adapt to this patch. I was talking with a few of my higher ranked friends, even higher ranked than me, significantly so, Forgiving and Reese, about the way tanks are playing out, and we're kind of coming to a lot of the same conclusions. Some of them I think are going to surprise you. Okay, so a lot of people have been asking me on stream, who are the best tanks to play right now? Well, let's remember what the changes were. Armor reworked to Overwatch 1 armor. It's basically great against shotguns and small, quick increments of damage, but useless against everything else. Okay, honestly, it's like you don't have armor against most things, which is worse, a net nerf overall, but a buff against shotguns and fast firing rate weapons. So keep that in mind. Headshot reduction is going to bias for a few tanks, 25% less damage on headshots. Self-heal, not so important. They try to buff it on tanks. One tank wins from that the most, but those are the major changes, okay? So top tanks right now, boom, we're going Rein, Winston, Roadhog. Can you believe it? These are the tanks that are able to deal with a few of the top picks of the game right now. We'll get into that when we talk about damage, specifically what we mean, but medium range poke damage characters are best. They can whittle down a lot of the other tanks, ones that have armor. Let's look at the other end of the spectrum right now. I think some of the worst tanks, we might move where these are right now, but armor tanks that can get poked down from damage, from range, are kind of useless now, because they used to be able to put their armor in the front line, get poked for a while, hold their position. Now you can't do that. A medium range poke character is going to destroy you if you think you're going to use your armor to do that. Now, these two have armor, but the reason why they're big winners with Rein and Winston is because you used to pick characters like Bastion or Reaper or maybe Mauga, Diva, Junker Queen, Roadhog, and be able to go at these tanks to blow them up. But with a bubble and a shield, they can effectively deal with those things, or their armor actually beats the thing that used to counter them. So the medium range damage characters get their damage gummed up by the shields, and then the things that would normally counter them get beat by the armor health. So Rein and Winston kind of look like the best because they can receive resources, win on the front line. You may be shocked to see REINHARDT this high up on the tier list, but when we start going through it, he's actually the best on the objective brawler now, because tanks that have armor will take more damage against Rein's abilities. So REINHARDT fighting against Ramatra, for example, I think I'll put Ram above Orisa though for sure. Rein will be able to do burst damage against the Ram armor, whereas Ram's rifle does basically nothing to armor health. So while Nemesis form will still punch Rein through his shield, it's not so impressive, whereas Rein has burst damage plays, including the buff they gave to Earth Shatter, which is really important. Pin now does more damage against armored tanks, and both hammer swings and fire strikes will do a lot. Now, Hog's up here at the top of the list as well in the A tier. He's not going to help your team as much as REINHARDT and Winston will, but he's just good against the rest of the squishies. He's the one that I would say benefits the most from the headshot reduction, because he's a tank that was a major weakness that's now gone. It doesn't really matter that he has armor. That wasn't what he used to sustain before, so the armor nerf doesn't really affect him. He only really gains buff of the self-healing passive a little bit. You know, you probably don't hide off on the side so much as Hog, but when you do, maybe you're healing from that. You already have Vape, which is really good of an ability overall for insane damage reduction, self-tanking, sort of like a Diva Matrix almost, with its ability to keep Hog alive. All in all, at the end of the day, it's like somehow Take a Breather is a better tanking ability than Orisa Fortify, because they nerfed Orisa Fortify significantly where she moves slower. And Hog got one major buff that's important. Whole Hog is significantly better against tanks than before. It was already good against tanks, but now he won't expect to be able to burst through the armor health of these two, for example, but he can pressure down the shields if your team is looking to break shields. Keep in mind, guys, it depends whether you have some dive or all of a poke comp. Like if Hog's in a poke comp, maybe you can break the shields, but if you've got Tracer Sombra, you're never going to break the shields. So play around that and adjust accordingly whether you go at the shields or not. He's not going to expect to deal with these characters' armor very well, but he can get picks on squishies and then actually have a really big interaction in the ult fight. Rein's Shatter is probably the best ult of the three of these when they're all fighting together. In theory, if it lands, Winston's ult has a big high skill ceiling, and of course, because he has armor in that form, But Whole Hog has the opportunity to hard counter either of these tanks, and really any tank. Whole Hog being able to insta-kill most tanks is pretty insane. There's only a few that have the ability to block it unless they can just run away. Okay, now I'm going to get into, I think, situational tanks. We're going to put these three here. Doomfist, Sigma, and Junker Queen. The problem with Sigma right now is he's not good against these engagement tanks. They either run over him or run past him, just kind of clown him overall. And Hog and Sigma are kind of neutral. Like, Sig can slow down the Hog, but also Hog has counterplay against the Sig. It's sort of even, which eventually favors the Hog, I think, because he's self-healing. His ult's easier, just get buffed, but I don't know if that really makes a huge difference. Just easier to target than before. If you were good with it, you weren't missing it anyway, I don't think. So yes, it hits more targets than before, but oh well, not really changing his tier list so much. I'll leave Sig above Queen just because he has a shield. There are sniper maps in the game, so if you're up against snipers, Sig will still be able to shield them off while being able to deal damage. He's sort of a reliable in the middle tank. I kind of like his placing here. He's not as severe W as some of these, but he will have some of the burst damage as Hog and be able to zone out snipers, especially if that's giving you trouble. I don't think you necessarily even have to play Sig though a lot of the time, because you could just play up tempo with these up here and be fine. I've only recently started to learn Doomfist, so I might be biased in that he sort of feels like the Overwatch 2 tank that has the skill expression to interact with a lot of the game. While he can be countered, he also is a menace when he's uncountered. I'm going to leave him here at the top of B because I think if you don't want to mirror these top two picks here, Doomfist is kind of one of the better answers to be able to have a higher impact than them and more solo carry potential. These two will be better with a bit of teamwork, but if you're struggling to do that, Doom has the insane aggro to try to get greedier with your tank value, as in you need to do more, land more abilities, pop off more, but he's got the kit that could potentially do that. Of course, not going to have a good time up against the Roadhog character. While Queen does suffer with her shotgun damage against armor, she does have Axe that can go through it anyway, and a big ultimate that's going to cleave these type of comps that like to play together. Queen is another character who is going to benefit from that headshot resist similar to Roadhog, but maybe just takes a little bit more skill to play. I think Hog's a bit easier because he can play slower and just deals more burst damage, but Queen's upside might put her all the way up top into another tier placing if you're actually good with her. Rearranging the tier list just a little bit to make space for things. I think we're going to put these tanks lower down. One more I'm going to slide somewhere here in B tier is Zarya. An interesting interaction is like Zarya is a lot better against Reinhardt than you might think. It used to be the case where Rein would counter Zarya back in the day, but with the armor changes, if you do get the Rein shield down, Zarya's damage is pretty good against Rein all of a sudden. That might be a bug or hotfix they have to change, but I remember her struggling a lot more against the minus 30% damage armor, whereas now the new minus 5 per damage instance. I don't know if it's just because her bombs will be affected against that less because that's burst damage, or if for some reason the beam isn't getting like micro ticked. Like if the DPS is just high enough, I guess, where it's not getting minus 5 per a lot of damage. I'm not exactly sure how the game translates it, but from the personal point of view, I've noticed that a high energy Zarya is kind of rolling Rein in a surprising way. But I think the major weakness of Zarya is her mobility limitations. She sort of just has to fight the front line and is going to play a bit more passive, and so you really need your teammates to be making plays and saving them with bubbles, or the enemy to focus you badly and then you get charged from it and run away and are able to duel things. Otherwise you can kind of spectate the game a little bit, whereas some of these other tanks can proactively do something. Zarya is a bit too reactive for my taste to put her too much higher on the tier list. We might rearrange a few of these, but going on to D.Va, I'm pretty happy with putting her in C tier right now because she used to be good at fighting Winston, right? She used to be a very good dive counter. The problem is armor health is really good against D.Va's damage now, which means she just kind of can't deal any damage to him for quite a while. Most of the time, I just feel you should mirror the Winston. Like if you want to tank shoot as the tank, Winston will deal more damage against Winston than D.Va will. So because of that, D.Va finds herself kind of needing to base trade, which is to say go at the enemy's squishies while the dive tank is going at yours, and she's not as good at that. Why play D.Va to play a budget version of those styles if that's what you're kind of relegated to? I think D.Va does have a really good matchup against Roadhog though, because the armor health she has is insane. Like half of her health is armor, so the hog really struggles to deal any damage to her at all. Meanwhile, she has infinite damage into him. Yes, headshot reduction reduces how much damage you'll do to the hog, but overall, she can kind of face tank that and protect your team. That's the one matchup I think she's pretty good at. Ball got several buffs this patch, but I don't see why you need to play him, because there's so many cases where like Winston jumps in, cleaves everybody. Big AoE attack, eventually gets up to Primal. Primal lasts so long, you're so much skill expression with Primal. Yeah, some of the numbers are better on Ball, but it's just sort of like way too much work for what it's worth, and you could just be playing Doomfist if you want to have that similar playstyle. While yes, Minefield and the damage on his roll went up, he boops tanks even less than before, so characters that like he's already was bad at doing that, now he's even worse at it, and he got CC resist like all of the tanks, but I feel like you can still Brig boop or Lucio boop to fully counter Wrecking Ball speeding up into Fireball form. I've seen it so many times where either I was trying to do it as Ball, or when I was playing support so far this patch, just like one little boop stopped his momentum entirely. And so it's not so much about him getting CC'd, it's his losing ability to kind of roll through and freely activate his abilities. If you can halt your momentum like that, it's pretty whack. Then there's all the hard CC in the game, which wasn't dealt with at all. Stuns from either Doomfist, Roadhog, these are relevant characters. I mean, someone wants to play Orisa, fine. Those are hard CC, or on a Sleep Dart, Sombra Hack. These are things that just target you, and you're not more resistant to it than before, and you get headshot resistance, but how does that help Ball when he keeps his head inside of Ball for most of the time? So a lot of the buffs just don't really help him. The tank rework, this isn't helping him at all. Like, imagine this. The Winston dives your team, puts on a bubble, zaps them all. Can you peel for the Winston? None of your damage really hurts him. You can't move him out of the way. Your team's just gonna die. So you need to go kill as efficiently as that, and Winston does that easier. I can maybe see a matchup where Ball could be good against Rein comps, but then they would have to be playing Rein in a map where it's not good, and they're probably playing Winston if that's the case. Mauga's a tricky character because I feel I see high-ranked players get a lot more value out of him because they just know how to position, rotate away. They read the game better, and like when the whole team is reading the game better, I think Mauga starts to look like really sustainable. He can run away from ultimates, play keep away forever, self-sustain. When he gets antied, his teammate's probably going to Suzu him, and they know how to run that cycle of abilities and then look to win with the ultimate. When I see Mauga players play outside of high ranks, they're trying to do way too much. Like, they try to go at one of these top tier tanks up here. The Roadhog, if he's good, like I'm pretty good at Hog, you just vape when he's using Shout, run away, and then you're like better than him because your Hog damage is better. Your whole Hog is even stronger than it was before, so you can beat the Mauga in the neutral or during cage fight. His damage, Mauga's damage, is worse against these armor tanks, and the shields get in the way. I'll say this one goes up if you have skill with Mauga and you're just really good at him, but I don't think he looks to be that much of a threat most of the time. That's all of the tanks. Let's look at the damage picks, the ones that I think are best. The one that I think is most annoying for the tank experience and can do quite a lot at multiple stages of the game is Cassidy. The reason why, a lot of these top tank picks, you can just fan the hammer into them. And if you're not playing one of these picks that can deal with fan the hammer, you are really screwed. Like, okay, Diva can Matrix it, I guess, but then is going to be weak to the poke when you don't have Matrix. Any of these other tanks can get just clicked down over and over again. Body shot, body shot, body shot. -5 damage per hit. Then if they try to close the distance like a tank is supposed to, fan the hammer, roll, fan the hammer. So easy. This is the Giga Easy anti-tank option, who he's also good at dueling. Like at medium range or close range, pretty good at dueling. Hit your shots, a lot of characters are going to fall down. Cassidy kind of like is just the hold the whole team comp together, play with your team, shoot the tank. If something flanks, punish it. Cassidy does it all right now. The only thing he doesn't do is snipe, but that got nerfed in the previous patches anyway. I'd say he's weakest against these 3 shield tanks. And yes, the tanks, when they do get on him, are going to be able to burst him, but that's going to be the case of any one tank versus one DPS. Otherwise, you can completely drain their health pools and duel a lot of the DPS in the game that are useful right now and have a pretty easy time. Other A tier picks, although the armor health makes Tracer weaker, she's just nuts, holds different angles, plays the off angle game. Tracer does everything that a damage character needs to do most of the time, except shoot at range. Plays an entire position on herself. Utterly required, I think, half the time on any map that's too big. If you need to go get map control or draw attention and cooldowns from the enemy team, Tracer is going to solve a lot of those problems for you. So you can clear spots that a lot of other characters can't sustain. Now, I want to populate the rest of the tier list with the other flanker options because I think it's really important that you have a medium range damage dealer and a flanker for a lot of situations. Sometimes you can run 2-range DPS, but the problem with that is there's certain characters like a well-played Winston or Reinhardt where they're going to rob space from you and you're not really going to be able to get into position, and then they have a flanker outbeating you as well, drawing too many resources while you look around and chase at them, and you're never really able to pressure the tank down like you think you will. If the enemy's picking one of the weaker tanks in the game, sure, 2 poke DPS are going to beat them just fine, but I'm gonna say you're really gonna strongly want to consider some of these flanker options. We're gonna put them down here in a few different categories. Reaper did lose some power, but I still think is decent against a lot of things. Like, you're not gonna expect him to beat out the tanks anymore the way that he used to. He just won't be cleared, can hold his position, and then as to the degree that you can take some squishy duels, then Reaper's good. But he's not good at just beating the tank for free anymore, so he's going to go down to C tier. But I think he's easy enough that you can still get a lot of value out of him for a while. It's just gonna be a bit troublesome if the map's too big to deal with either range or some of these other flanker picks that are just a bit better. It depends. Like, if you get some Zarya bubbles or some assistance or time it right, you can almost get him to work, but he's just a budget version of these other 2 picks above him. Sombra and Tracer are a bit better. There is going to be snipers getting played, so Genji's all right. I think Echo is probably got a higher skill ceiling and could go higher always if you're really good at her, but I don't see very many good Echo players, honestly, and it's pretty simple and easy to go one of the already pretty good medium range DPS characters to zone her out. Oddly enough, I think Pharah is better. I'm going to put Pharah in A tier now. And the reason is because her damage type damages armor better than Echo's does. While, yeah, Echo got a buff on duplicate, having Barrage is insta-killing a whole lot of tanks right now. And over time, I'm starting to notice that Pharah's rework really gave her outrageous movement capabilities. Like, this is sort of like playing against Doomfist in a way, where Pharah, if you start to maximize what she can do with her movement, you're in and out, able to pick a squishy. And then now after the armor rework, she works down a lot of the armor tanks as well. So Pharah, really good hero, hard to deal with when she's maximized. Obviously, if you stand out in the open and get shot by Cassidy or any of these other medium range characters I'm going to put in the list next to her, then yeah, she dies. But she is a pretty crazy pressure and dive threat now. She can play from long range spamming and then has an opportunity to go in deep and combo things to death. Pharah, really good character right now. Because while we're going to also put these medium range sniper class characters in the list as well, these can't move as freely in and out, whereas Pharah's got multiple movement options and burst damage, and the damage is easier to hit because it's a big old projectile. But we've got Widow, Sojourn, and Ashup here. All 3 of these have movement abilities to get away from the engagement tanks, play from range to either poke and pressure down the tank picks, but also can win duels against a lot of the other squishies in the game also. It used to be the case that with the old armor values, you might feel like a lot of these characters up here just wouldn't kill a Ram or an Orisa or Mauga riding the cart, but the way it's switched around is now the shields get in the way, all tanks are clearable, so because of that, even a thing you were used to be slow and weaker at, you're now decent to great at, and then on top of it, you also have all of the ranged angle control of an FPS game, and Overwatch 2 is definitely biasing towards that. So all of these FPS characters are really, really good now, but it's going to adjust based on your skill, of course. Okay, a few other ranged DPS we're going to populate into the list. Soldier, kind of mediocre, I think, like is going to do well against the worst tanks, but then isn't as impactful as these picks against the better tanks. He's going to lose a lot of duels against these characters above him, I feel, so he's just kind of okay. Armor got worse, so Torb's armor also got worse. He's even weaker against poke than before. Granted, with the big old hitboxes, maybe you can shoot back, but Torb, meh. Hanzo, really bad. I've been saying he's decent for a while, but with more practice, I'm starting to learn that, well, now that you kind of don't need a Hanzo to tank bust, like there's not really a point. The tanks that are getting played can outplay medium range damage anyway. Like if you're against Ram or Orisa or Mauga, okay, sure, you'll have a big old target to farm. Hanzo's dueling capability against everything else above him on the list is mediocre unless he has a mercy pocket. They buffed his ultimate, but it's pretty irrelevant. Hanzo's just not very good. We were seeing a lot of Hog, and Hanzo could absolutely melt a Roadhog, but now with the minus 25% damage, headshot reduction, even he's not good at that. I don't know what he's good at anymore, honestly. Venture and Reaper, kind of the same character, honestly. Venture a little bit better, so we'll put them above on the list. Bastion, oddly enough, is like easy enough to still be pretty decent value, but not as flexible as Soldier. Junkrat got a buff, but still kind of sucks, I think. I think Sim and Mei are pretty weak on their own, but Reinhardt's pretty good, so you could play them with a Rein if you have some teamwork, but you kind of just don't need these picks because you could just play Cass and get a similar amount of like lockdown control and then also be able to play more positions. If you don't have the aim to play Cass, then pick these or play them on Li Jiang, I guess. I think having thought about it more, I'm going to populate the tier list just a little bit more this way because I think this would be even more accurate to how I feel about these characters. That looks a little more aesthetically pleasing, but also I think just more accurate to their actual overall power level. A few adjustments here. I think Venture is easy enough that at lower ranks especially, their cooldown cycle can dominate. Same thing with Tor, we'll put them a little bit higher, and Junk for similar reasons. I think all of these characters get a medium amount of value and aren't going to be so bad in a good setup where they're actually good on the map or in the matchup. A tier, I think these are the picks that are going to be your build around in the team comp, as in they're the ones that are going to be performing the most value for you. B, these are ones that are can kind of like counter pick the enemy, and if they're set up in the right spot, they'll be decent. C tier, these really need the right map and matchup to have a chance of being any good. D tier, I'd say these are generally not great. Okay, on to the supports now. A tier support, gonna be Lucio. Playing support with my friends recently, it was hard for me to find a time where I felt like Lucio was a bad pick. A lot of his stats aren't going to just pump value into a teammate, but if you think about it, Winston sets up and then dives and then self-heals. Ryan's got a big old shield and wants to go in. Roadhog has his own healing. So with tanks having more self-heal potentially when they're out of combat, you might not necessarily need a character that just pumps lots of healing. For the ones that are going to like help you stay in the fight as you're fighting, sure, but Lucio's healing is totally fine out of combat. And very importantly, he can get away in the middle of the fight, reassess, and contest a lot of these other characters. Like, who else are you going to help get your team away from a Winston or a Reinhardt rushing you down? Like, if you've got to reposition, you got to have an ultimate in order to beat some of these other ults that will wipe you. You need a character that can help contest a tracer or flank the enemy's hit scans. Lucio does like everything in the game right now. He's really good. They nerfed his damage down to 18, but his headshots are pretty easy to hit. I don't know, really strong. The ceiling's really, really high. Kind of holds the team together in many ways. I think the only other support we're going to put in the A tier is going to be Kuriko. Even though this is a character that has a negative win rate, she has the skill ceiling, especially with good kunai aim, to battle a lot of these characters, except maybe Pharah. Repositioning is really important, and having cleanse for anti is going to really help a lot of these other tanks not get hard countered easily by Ana. It's important as well that Kitsune Rush is really good for all three of these top tanks. Winston zapping at double speed through armor, getting a bubble faster. This character is really strong, and remember, tanks can self-heal better now, so you don't necessarily have to only put healing numbers into them. With that being said, we are going to put BAP as the top of the B tier, mainly just because he's a little too static to always be good, but he has a fighting chance against a lot of things. He's the one that's going to help you stay in the fight and keep brawling and overwhelm the enemy with lots of stats, because he can just pump heals into either of these tanks. Like if Winston plays in a brawlier style, you can still heal him as BAP. He's better with Rein because when you throw the lamp, he can shield up to protect it. But I think also a major benefit is a lot of these characters like to shoot through Amp Matrix, and some of the better characters at eating Amp Matrix's damage or getting away from it aren't really getting played. So as long as you get your positioning going and are set up safely, BAP can be very, very good. Another top tier pick I'm going to put is Brig. While in theory armor got worse, there's a few picks where Brig's armor is better, like against Tracer, Wrecking Ball, Reaper. Armor's just better against those things than it was before. Brig is weaker to getting poked, so you will have to be more safe against the Fan the Hammer of Cassidy, for example. But because you have a shield and the positions you want to play anyway, you mainly needed that armor against your flank. So she can fortify her position a lot better than before, and it sort of depends. Like Brig and Lucio are interchangeable supports. Do you want to stand still and kind of defend, or do you want to be able to reposition? Very similar playstyles in the role that they give for the team. Also, she got one of the better buffs this patch where she gets a Brig Bash resets when using her ultimate, which I feel people really haven't learned how to maximize. Just for the DPS alone or the repositioning and clutch potential, Brig is kind of nasty. Okay, I'm going to tentatively put Ana and Illari in this tier as well. I'm not so strong about their B tier performance. I'm going to say it depends on your execution. Be very careful. They can knock down to lower on the tier list because they're immobile. A lot of these characters at the top of the list are mobility, and so that means you're going to be positionally outplayed. If your team doesn't set you up and protect you, then it can be really hard. Like, I see a lot of Ana players blow their cooldowns and become the weak link of the team, and a lot of these other characters can go in and out or constantly apply pressure and be effective. Illari, going to depend on your aim. These medium range poke heroes, really good. So if you feel you're going to zone out some of these DPS and then apply pressure onto one of the tanks, especially if one of the lower ranked tanks is getting picked, Illari is going to farm a lot of value. And if they don't have the right answers or counteract your Illari ultimate, it's pretty insane. We're going to put Zen down here. I'm not seeing Zen get big value anymore. Mainly, I think because the tanks have the durability to move in again. And so you're not going to just hide in the back and exchange Orisa cooldowns into the face front anymore. Like Rein and Winston, they're going to go take space, ideally. It kind of doesn't happen now that you get two tanks just holding the front line staring at each other forever. And then Zen's like an insane power magnifier for your side. That's not the gameplay anymore. Like maybe on the sniper maps, you're going to feel safe way in the back applying pressure damage. But overall, I feel like the strength of the game is in the mobility and rush going in. So Zen, similar to the risk of Illari and Ana, feels similar where you're kind of left off and you need help in order to survive yourself against dive or just insane skill. Very situational, I'd say. If you're way in the back and safe, some of these tank picks are not going to like walking into a Discord for a while, but just look at the rest of the game. It's like, I feel Zen's just prey against most of these picks. I'll thankfully say I will put Moira down here in C tier as well. I would put her even lower, but she's just so easy that I would rather this teammate be on a Moira rather than a riskier pick that dies easier. So that's the one saving grace, but they did end up nerfing her grasp damage that did have ripple effects on her gameplay significantly. And so she is obnoxious. She's pretty reliable, but is going to fall off, I think. Her ult is looking quite weak now, I'd say, as well. Like in comparison to these other ults in the support category, that's really important because that's how you carry a lot of the game. I don't think she's so ideal with either Hog or Rein. She's amazing with Winston. Genji's really popular of a hero, so click Moira into Genji and you'll have an easy time. She actually does a surprising amount of damage at the ranges Pharah wants to dive bomb in on, and so if her aim isn't good enough, you can kind of out splash damage that, but splash damage isn't so important to the game right now. There's a lot of individual lock-on, so I don't know, just kind of a meh pick overall, I'd say. Further down the meh category is going to be Lifeweaver, because other than playing on Ilios well, he just sort of like slowly gets you to retreat. Lifeweaver usually isn't the reason you'll lose a game, but he really struggles to win it. I've legitimately seen games where the Lifeweaver player has like 10,000 healing in a round and we're kind of getting blown out. When you have a Lifeweaver, you sort of need a teammate that's going to be playing aggro nonsense in order to get kills, and you sort of don't even need to do that for team fights to resolve right now. The characters that are good at doing that are like Venture, Junkrat, Reaper, whereas the characters at the top of the list, they don't need to put themselves at huge risk to get kills. They're just pressuring out the enemy or get instant picks with the way they play the game. Oh, and the last but not least, Mercy pick. Where are we going to put Mercy for the Mercy Mafia to not come after me? I think she's all the way up in B tier. I think she's just middle of the road, just kind of normal. The situation with Mercy is you can place her safely in a team and you're sort of on a clock, basically. Like, how many peaks will the character she is damage amping get? And will you kill the Mercy in time? Very similar in this category, but for opposite reasons. She's a win more or lose hard type character. If you're struggling against the player that she's pocketing, and you also can't really feel like you get on her because she just flies away all the time, you may have to consider some of the other picks in the game, because really the way you beat Mercy is with teamwork. If you're playing some of the mobility characters, like if you are a Lucio and you're trying to kill a Mercy, like good luck with that. Same thing with Winston. What's Ryan gonna do? He just flies away. I'll say like a Mercy damage amping a Cass has felt very difficult for me to deal with, as a lot of tank heroes especially, because the fan the hammer damage, like remember, -5 per damage instance is new armor, and then he can get a damage amp and roll Fan the Hammer and do it 3 times in a row while having damage resistance on the roll and getting a beam pocket heal whenever he needs. Then he can pop his ult and then zone everything out of the way. This is kind of an outrageous synergy on the right pick, right? Mercy can utterly take over the game paired up with one of these other top tier DPS picks. But at the same time, if like flankers get behind her and they're not able to keep her alive or she can't escape, then she looks like a liability. If you're struggling with a Mercy player onto a Soldier, Sojourn, Ashe, Pharah, Cassidy, etc., your 2 options are to play more divey in order to triangulate the Mercy and punish her limited escapes. Like, she has an incredibly powerful 1 escape. If 1 target goes at the Mercy, very likely she uses her mobility, gets away, flies in the air, hovers, totally safe, still applying healing, constant, consistent value, she's fine. But hit her from 2 angles and she just falls over pretty much immediately. But you got to sync that up with your team, and a lot of times teams struggle with that. So the other option is go in harder and faster at the enemy's tank, because Mercy's tank interactions aren't very good. Rezzing a tank, insane value. Everything else, not so much. Because when the enemy has a Mercy on their team, they might be lacking speed, cleanse, disable for the tank fight, like Ana. All in all, decent character, middle of the list. There we go. That's the whole mid-season 10 tier list. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.